Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to be talking about something that I had mentioned in my introduction to Ayurveda video, which was that I was going to go over the 3 different doshas and kind of just give a brief overview of those. If you haven't seen that video where I do an introduction to Ayurveda, I definitely recommend you go and see that one because it's going to give you a brief introduction to Ayurveda if you don't already know what it is. And then you can come back here and we can go into a little bit more depth about the 3 different doshas. So in the last video, I talked about these 3 doshas, and doshas are pretty much the biological energies that govern all living beings, including our body, our mind, and the outside world as well. So the 3 primary doshas are Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, and these are comprised out of the 5 elements. In Ayurveda, there's 5 elements. There's space, which is like the ethers, and then air, water, fire, and earth. So we'll get into which ones these ones are. And then, you know, we can use these, like if you do a dosha test, to see what your prakriti, so what your birth constitution is, and what your vikriti, or your imbalance is. So I'm going to put a couple of links down below where you can get a dosha test done, and you can see what your constitution is and what your imbalance is. So generally, the way these tests work is that they're 2 separate tests. One is asking you questions based off of how you've been your entire life, which is your prakriti, and then the other portion of the exam is how you've been in the last 3 or 6 months or things like that. Alright guys, so after you take that test, you can come back and listen to this video again and kind of see if you resonate with your answers. I'm going to be doing videos on each one separately as well, so once you do know which ones you are, because you can be more than one, generally it's 1 to 2. Most people aren't tridoshic, but when you figure out which ones you are, then you can listen to the videos or watch the videos that I'm going to be doing on each separate dosha, okay? So we're going to start with Vata, because this is actually known as the king of the doshas, because it's comprised of space, the ether, and air. It pretty much governs like the greater life force, right? Wind. And it actually, Vata means that which moves. So similar to wind. The qualities of Vata are dry, rough, light, cold, and so due to these qualities, we can kind of start seeing the qualities that somebody would have if they're Vata. Vata people tend to be really creative. They tend to be very communicative and expressive. They tend to be a little bit thinner. People who are mainly Vata don't have a huge appetite, so they might eat smaller meals throughout the day. They might eat on the go. Some of the negative, if they're out of balance, then a lot of times people will have things that are anything that's drying, so dry skin, dry scalp, constipation, anxiety, because there tends to be more nervous energy in these people, so anxiety tends to be higher if out of balance. These people just tend to be very lively people. They tend to be a little bit more composed as well than Pitta. So Vata is ruled by the color light blue, and I'm going to get into more depth about colors when I do the doshas separately, but it is primarily ruled by light blue. And in order to bring Vata back to balance, instead of doing things that are dry, rough, light, cold, mobile, we would instead focus on things that are grounding, things that are warming, and things that are bring routine into your life, because these tend to be things that are lacking in a Vata person. They tend to kind of not be quite organized. They might be a little bit more scatterbrained, but they may also be good at a lot of different things because of that scatterbrainedness. So there's positive and negatives, but if it gets out of balance, this is the primary one that we want to fix. So let's say that you've got a vata and pitta imbalance. You want to focus on the vata first because it is the king of the doshas. So there are more diseases associated with vata than the other two doshas. So you always want to take care of vata first, and then you can focus on the other imbalance. And generally, taking care of vata will help the other imbalance just on its own. Okay, so on to the next dosha. So the next one that we have is pitta. Pitta literally means in Sanskrit that which cooks. So it has a lot to do with your digestion and the heat. Like I said in the previous video, in Ayurveda, digestion is really important. So, and they do think of it as being a digestive fire. So this has a lot to do with digestion. People who are pitta tend to have really big appetites, and their digestion tends to be really, really good if in balance. They are made of this dosha comprises of fire and water, and the qualities are oily, sharp, hot, light, acidic. And one of the major things that could happen here is inflammation. Whenever I think of pitta, I think of the color red because that is the color that governs pitta. And it can cause anything that, like when I think of the diseases that can cause when it's out of balance, they all tend to kind of be red and pink, right? A lot of people can, that are pitta, they tend to be really hot a lot. So, when you get hot, you get rosy. Inflammation, areas that are inflamed tend to get red. Acne, because this is an oily dosha as well, acne tends to happen, and acne generally comes from inflammation as well. And, eczema, rashes, things like that. So instead, we want to do things that are cooling, calming, and in moderation, because the qualities of someone who's got a pitta personality, they tend to be very bold, courageous. A lot of entrepreneurs are predominantly pitta energy. Their constitution is pitta. They tend to just be go-getters. They can be really focused, but when that gets out of balance, these people can be really, really difficult to be around. They can be really angry all the time, like rage, like anger. They can overheat really easily. They can become super overbearing. Their egos can get really inflated. So it's really important for them to get tempered by some sort of cooling, calming, and some moderation, because like I said, they tend to be very passionate and very focused. So like if you know somebody who's always warm, who's always hot, they're probably a pitta constitution. Their prakriti is probably pitta. And if you know someone who's always cold, they might be vata. They might also be kapha, because kapha is cold, but vata, like I said, they tend to have very low appetite. They tend to be skinnier, longer limbs, thinner, and usually tall, not always. And whereas kapha, people don't generally look like that. Speaking of kapha, though, we can just head on over to kapha now. So kapha. Some of the qualities of kapha are moist, cold, heavy, dull, sticky. It is comprised of water and earth. And when I think of kapha, when I think of pitta, I think of inflammation. And when I think of kapha, I think of mucus. A lot of physical manifestations when out of balance in kapha tend to be mucus related, like sinus congestion, chest congestion. So, and I'll get into this more. Yeah, I'm not even going to mention what I was going to say. But there's different phases of our lives that are governed by these doshas as well. And there's also different seasons that are governed by doshas. So it gets really, really interesting in that aspect. Okay, I'm just going to tell you guys. I can't wait. So kapha is when your childhood is governed by kapha. And one of the things that we see as children more than anything is kids that, you catch a lot of colds. You always have a lot of congestion. And also, springtime is a kapha season. So once again, a lot of people get allergies during this time. People still get sick during springtime. So it's really interesting when you start learning more and more about it. But like I said, I'll go more into detail on that when I actually do these separately. So people who are kapha tend to generally have slower digestion, but they have a healthy appetite. So they generally tend to maybe be not, I don't want to say fat, because obesity is, when it's imbalanced, they can easily become overweight or obese. But generally they just tend to be a little bit bigger, whereas like vata is like very thin, and they might have small light bones. Kapha is heavy, so they tend to just have that bigger constitution. They might just have really big bones, or they might just actually be bigger, but there's a sense of heaviness with them. But they also tend to be very calm, loving, patient. On the flip side, they become greedy and attached to the material realm. That's when they're imbalanced, right? So some things that you can try if you are trying to balance kapha would be things that are drying, stimulating, and expressive. Because a lot of times what can happen to kapha people when it's out of balance too is they tend to feel very heavy. And so this kind of is what part of the reason why, along with the slow digestion, that kind of stickiness in their body, that leads to obesity when imbalanced, because there's just such a sense of heaviness to the body, and they become depressed and really fatigued all the time, and it gets really difficult to go to the gym or get the body moving and things like that. So there are different things that will kind of help with that. And so I cannot wait to do these individual videos, because there's just so much information that's so interesting. Oh, and it is generally ruled by yellows. Which is why, like personally for myself, my prakriti, so my constitution, is mostly pitta, but also some vata. And so my vikriti right now that I've been working on for the past few months is vata. My vata has been out of balance. And so I've been working on that, not as much as I should be, but I, throughout my days, I'll make decisions based off of, is this something that's grounding, warming? Am I building a routine? For example, like I love potato chips, and potato chips don't really help my vata imbalance because they're dry, rough, they're light. And so a lot of times when I eat potato chips, I'm like, man, I know this is probably not the best choice. But do you see what I'm saying? Like throughout my day, I'll be like, okay, let me have some soup. Soup is grounding, it's warming, it makes your body feel more lubricated, since vata tends to be really dry. So it's things like that that I think get really, really interesting. So you don't have to like memorize like, I have to do this, 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 and this. It's just kind of a way of living. And the thing that I love about Ayurveda is that it doesn't ever say that, okay, you're fixed now. The goal is to really maintain your prakriti, so not being imbalanced, which is vikriti, and just having a healthy prakriti. I think that's it for now. I will start making some videos that go more into detail about these. So once you figure out your constitution and your vikriti, your imbalance, you can come on back to see what kind of videos I have on those particular doshas. So once again, thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon.